How is it possible that a city built in the middle of nowhere, without steel, without wheels, and without pack animals, became larger than Rome? How is it possible that its buildings are still standing after 2,000 years, while the most advanced cities in the modern world collapse with the first tremor? And how is it possible that no one knows who built it, who governed it, or why it was abandoned overnight? You are watching the right video. Today I'm going to talk to you about Teotihuacan, the most powerful city that has ever existed in all of Mesoamerica. A metropolis that existed centuries before the Aztecs set foot in the Valley of Mexico. And that still today holds secrets that the brightest archaeologists on the planet have not been able to solve. Imagine walking through the streets of your city on a Sunday morning, when traffic does not yet exist. Now multiply that city by 20. Add pyramids so large that from the top you can see the entire horizon. Add the smell of burnt copal, the sound of thousands of people negotiating in a market larger than any square you have ever stepped on. The color of murals painted in bright red that cover walls kilometers long. That was Teotihuacan at its peak, around the year 400 AD, when it was inhabited by over 200,000 people. To give you a real idea of what that means, at that same moment, London was a smaller town with barely 20,000 inhabitants. Paris practically did not exist. Rome was already in decline, and here, in what is now the state of Mexico, there was a metropolis that concentrated more power, more art, and more engineering than any other city in the Western world. And no one had told you like this. What we were taught in school was a blurry picture. We were told that the Aztecs were the most advanced civilization in Mexico, that Tenochtitlan was the great capital, and that everything started with them. But that's like saying that the history of music started with the CD. Because before the Aztecs, long before, there was something so imposing, so sophisticated, and so mysterious that the Aztecs themselves, when they arrived centuries later and saw those abandoned ruins, believed that only the gods could have built it. They themselves called it Teotihuacan, which in Nahuatl means the place where men become gods. Think about it. Even their successors, a warrior and conquering civilization, looked at that place and said, "This was not made by men." And you know what? They were right to feel small. But before we dive deep, if you are interested in the history that no one told you about the civilizations that dominated this continent, subscribe right now. Every week we publish stories that go far beyond what you were taught in books. The button is down there. One click and you're in. Let's go back to Teotihuacan. The city did not appear overnight. Its origin dates back to around 100 BC, when various populations from the Central Highlands began to converge at a specific point in the Valley of San Juan. Teotihuacan. Archaeologists still debate why that exact point. One theory that has gained strength in recent decades is that it all started with a geological event. A volcanic eruption in the area of Cuculco, a nearby city that forced thousands of people to move and seek a new home. They arrived in the valley. They found it fertile, with access to the water of the San Juan River, and they stayed. At first, there were few. Then there were thousands. And something happened in that place that turned a village into the epicenter of the Mesoamerican world. That something was obsidian. If you live in the 21st century, obsidian seems like a pretty stone, something sold in craft markets. But in the pre-Hispanic world, obsidian was the closest thing to steel. It was the sharpest material known to mankind, sharper than any metal. And Teotihuacan was built on one of the largest deposits on the continent. The hills of Otamba and the Sierra de las Navajas, just a few kilometers from the city, were natural mines of obsidian of exceptional quality. And the Teotihuacans knew it. They turned it into the economic pillar of their entire civilization. From Teotihuacan, caravans of merchants left carrying blades, projectile points, scrapers, and obsidian knives to all of Mesoamerica. Teotihuacan obsidian has been found in Oaxaca, on the Gulf Coast, in southern Veracruz, in Guatemala, in Honduras. Archaeologists estimate that the largest obsidian workshop discovered in the city produced thousands of pieces a day at its peak. Teotihuacan was not just a sacred city. It was an economic powerhouse with trade networks so extensive that they connected regions that today would be equivalent to several countries. And that, in the ancient world, was pure power. But trade was only part of what made this city special. What really set Teotihuacan apart from everything that existed in Mesoamerica was its urbanism, its architecture, its planning. Because Teotihuacan did not grow spontaneously and chaotically like most ancient cities. Teotihuacan was designed. Someone, at some point, made the decision to build a city with a central axis over 4 kilometers long. That axis is what we now know as the Avenue of the Dead, which the Aztecs named centuries later because they thought the platforms on the sides were tombs. They were not. They were temples, ceremonial platforms, elite residences. But the name stuck. And that avenue, that 4-kilometer boulevard laid out with mathematical precision that still amazes us today, was the backbone of the entire city. On that axis were built the 2 most monumental structures in all of Mesoamerica. The Pyramid of the Sun, 108 meters at the base, 65 meters high, over 1 million tons of material used in its construction, without cranes, without wheels, without horses, without iron, only human strength, organizational intelligence, and a collective will that still today is incomprehensible. The Pyramid of the Sun is the 3rd largest pyramidal structure in the world, surpassed only by the pyramids of Giza in Egypt and the Great Pyramid of Cholula, which is also in Mexico. That is not a coincidence. There is something in this territory, in this people, in this way of understanding the world, that produced the largest monuments that humanity has ever built. And beneath the Pyramid of the Sun, there is a tunnel. It was discovered in 1971 by the archaeologist Jorge Acosta, completely accidentally. An assistant stepped into a hole near the base of the pyramid and found the entrance. What opened behind that entrance was a tunnel over 100 meters long, which ended in a clover-leaf-shaped chamber. Inside, they found ritual objects, pyrite mirrors, vessels, figurines. But the most shocking was the chamber itself. Archaeologists determined that it was natural, formed by water, and that the Teotihuacans found it, modified it, and decided to build the largest pyramid on the continent directly above it. Why? Because that cavern was built considered the place of origin, the mouth through which humanity emerged at the beginning of present time. They did not build a pyramid because of the tunnel, they built it for the tunnel. This logic, this thought, this way of connecting the underground world with the sky through an artificial mountain is the key to understanding everything that was Teotihuacan. The second Great Pyramid is that of the Moon, built at the northern end of the Avenue of the Dead. It is smaller in volume than that of the Sun, but it was built in successive stages over several centuries, like an onion, adding layers upon layers, and its alignment with the Cerro Gordo hill behind it was absolutely intentional. From the center of the city, the Pyramid of the Moon and the hill form a single silhouette. If architecture and nature were the same thing. And in excavations carried out within its core since the 1990s, archaeologists found something that chilled the blood of many foundational sacrifices. Human bodies, animals, luxury objects, arranged with perfect ritual precision to activate according to the Teotihuacan worldview. The bodies were not buried haphazardly. They were placed in specific positions, with their hands tied, accompanied by animals like pumas, jaguars, and eagles, which in Mesoamerican cosmology represented warrior power and celestial power. This was a city that took its gods very seriously. And yet, here comes one of the most puzzling things about all of Teotihuacan. There are no kings. In all the ancient cities of the world, the first thing rulers did was leave their name engraved everywhere. In Egypt, pharaohs put their face and name on every column, every wall, every statue. In Mesopotamia, the same. In the Maya civilization itself, which was contemporary with Teotihuacan, kings recorded even their smallest victories on stone stelae with detailed glyphs. But in Teotihuacan, after more than 100 years of excavations, archaeologically, not a single identifiable portrait of a ruler has been found. There is not a single inscription with the name of a king. There is no personal monument that celebrates the ego of a particular person. That is extraordinary and completely inexplicable. Some researchers, like archaeologist Linda Manzanilla, who has dedicated decades to studying the city, propose that Teotihuacan may have been governed by a system of collective elites. Several power groups that shared the administration of the city in a rotating or parallel manner. Something like a republic or an oligarchy, but in Mexico in the year 300. If that is correct, it would mean that Teotihuacan was, for centuries, one of the most sophisticated systems of government in the ancient world. Without an absolute monarchy, without a pharaoh, without a Caesar. And that would radically change the way we understand Mesoamerican politics. But how did 200,000 people organize without a visible king? The answer lies in the neighborhoods. Teotihuacan was divided into residential areas called departmental complexes, or tlaichinga, structures that house between 20 and 100 people, who shared a courtyard, kitchen, rituals, and probably kinship or occupational ties. Archaeologists have identified entire neighborhoods of artisans, neighborhoods of merchants, and something no one expected to find. Neighborhoods of foreigners. In the western part of the city, there is an area called the Oaxacan neighborhood, where a community from the present-day state of Oaxaca lived, with its own funerary customs, its own identity. And in the eastern area, the merchant neighborhood, possibly inhabited by people from the Gulf of Mexico or the Maya region. Teotihuacan was not a homogeneous city. It was multicultural. It was cosmopolitan, in the most literal sense of the word. And that is something that almost no one mentions when talking about pre-Columbian civilizations. Subscribe if this is blowing your mind, because what comes next is even more impressive. What happened in the year 550 of our era in this city is one of the great unresolved mysteries of world archaeology. Because Teotihuacan burned. Not the entire building, not the whole city, but the most important buildings of the ceremonial center, the temples, the palaces, the highest ranking structures, showed clear signs of intentional fire. It was not an accident. Researchers determined that the fire was specifically directed at the power buildings. The flames concentrated in elite spaces, in places of government and ritual. And after that fire, the city was never the same again. The big question is, who did it? Two main theories dispute that title. The first says it was an internal rebellion, that the lower classes, the artisans, the peasants, the workers who had built that city for generations, rose up against the elite that governed them and destroyed the symbols of their power. This theory has some evidence. The fire selectively concentrated on the highest ranking structures, and there are indications that some elite residential complexes were violently attacked. If that is correct, Teotihuacan did not collapse due to external invasion. It collapsed from within. It was a revolution. The first revolution recorded archaeologically in the history of America. The second theory points to external factors. Groups from the north. Peoples that archaeology generically calls border groups, who would have taken advantage of a moment of internal weakness to attack the city. There is evidence that in the centuries leading up to the collapse, the climate changed. The rains decreased. The harvests failed. Famine may have weakened the social fabric of a city that depended on feeding 200,000 mouths. Such a complex system, under enough pressure, can collapse faster than anyone expects. You and I know that can happen. We have seen it in modern history. Civilizations that seemed invincible, collapsing in a generation when conditions change. What is certain is that around the year 700 of our era, Teotihuacan was practically abandoned. Not suddenly, but gradually, in a process that took decades. People did not die en masse. They left. They dispersed to other regions, taking with them their knowledge, their art, their cosmology, their agricultural techniques. And that dispersion was, paradoxically, one of the greatest legacies of Teotihuacan. Because the knowledge that came out of that city influenced entire civilizations, the Toltecs, the Mixtecs, the Totonacs, and eventually the Aztecs themselves. When the Aztecs founded Tenochtitlan in the year 1325, Teotihuacan had been abandoned for over 600 years. And yet, the Aztecs pilgrimaged to its ruins to make offerings. They consider them sacred. They have found deposits of Teotihuacan objects within the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan. Objects that the Aztecs collected from the ruins and buried as relics in their own sacred city. That is what we humans do with what we cannot explain. We venerate it. And there is something else that connects Teotihuacan with your life. today, in the 20th century. The astronomical orientation system of the city was not an aesthetic whim. The Avenue of the Dead is angled 15.5 degrees off true north, and that angle exactly coincides with sunset on August 4 and 8, the days when the sun crosses the zenith at that latitude. This means the entire city was designed as a calendar, an astronomical clock on an urban scale. The buildings, plazas, and temples were all oriented to accurately mark the solar cycles that determined when to plant, when to harvest, when to go to war, and when to celebrate rituals. The architecture was information, it was technology, and that technology allowed Teotihuacan to sustain enough agricultural production to feed one of the largest cities in the world for over 5 centuries. 5 centuries. Rome dominated its territory for 5 centuries. The Ottoman Empire lasted 600 years. Teotihuacan, this city with no known name, no identified king, no deciphered writing, remained the greatest power in Mesoamerica for a time equivalent to twice the existence of the United States. And we still don't know who built it. That is perhaps the most disturbing detail of this entire story. For more than a century of intensive archaeology, thousands of excavations, DNA analysis of bone remains, isotope studies, satellite mapping, and tunnels explored with robots, we have no name for the people who built Teotihuacan. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know what they called their gods. We don't know what they called themselves. Teotihuacan is the name given to them by others, centuries later. The real name of that city, if it had one, was lost with the people who abandoned it. The most powerful city of its time, the one that influenced all the civilizations that came after, the one that built monuments still standing 2,000 years later, is anonymous. Its builders are the great unknowns of American history. But perhaps that anonymity is also a lesson. Because what they left behind were not statues of kings, not lists of military victories, not monuments to an individual's ego. What they left were pyramids that you can still climb today with your own feet. An astronomical system that still works. A city model that modern urban planners study with admiration. And a trade network that connected an entire continent without a single written map. What they left was everything except their names. And perhaps that is the most Teotihuacan thing of all, a civilization so confident in its greatness that it did not need to sign it. Today, when you visit Teotihuacan, and if you haven't done so, I tell you directly, go. It's worth every peso and every minute. When you climb to the top of the Pyramid of the Sun and look at the horizon in all directions, you are seeing exactly what the 200,000 people who lived there saw. The same valley, the same mountains, the same sky. They looked up and built something to reach it. We look down and still haven't finished understanding what we found. That is Teotihuacan, the largest city of the ancient world that no one remembers. The most influential civilization of Mesoamerica, whose builders have no name. The place where men became gods and today shows you that the history you were told was always incomplete. What other secrets remain buried under those stones? We still don't know that. But I assure you that when archaeologists finish exploring the tunnel discovered in 2011, under the temple of the feathered serpent, which has not yet been fully excavated. What they find will change everything we think we know about this civilization. And when that happens, we will be here to tell you.